Hey guys, Andy here. So we're taking a look today at the Moto G7 Plus. I think I've tried the G7 or a G7 variant for each generation that they've done. I think because, as I mentioned in the unboxing, the Moto G, the original Moto G, was such a good device for its money. I think it was like £120, but there were various offers at the time. I remember using quadrupled up Tesco vouchers or something, buying one for about 70 quid. So I had one myself, my mum had one, my aunt and uncle had one. My mum to this day still says it's the best phone she ever had and is very annoyed with me that I made her upgrade to other things that just aren't as good. It was just such a good phone. I'm not sure I've not been as impressed by any of the future generations as well as by the original, but that doesn't mean that they're not still great devices, obviously. And as you might have noticed, I said one of the variants, because you don't just get a Moto G or a G2 or a G3 or a G, in this case the G7 anymore. You get the G7 Play, the G7 Power, the G7 and the G7 Plus. Okay, so I'm going to pop up a little graphic over here and we'll have to look a bit of a look at the differences between the between the four. So I've marked them up at the prices that I seem to be able to find them at. And I like that they go through all the different ranges, whatever suits you. And if we just pick out some of the differences, so the Play obviously is the cheapest, £150. It's also the smallest with only a 5.7-inch screen, and it starts off at 32 gig of storage with just 2 gig of RAM. Differences for the power is obviously the battery, 6.2-inch screen, so a bit bigger at this for this step up, but a 5,000 milliamp hour battery. And as we're going to come to later, the G7 Plus is no slouch when it comes to the battery. So a 5,000 milliamp hour, I mean, it's almost twice as much as the other ones. Obviously, your maths will tell you that it's a good 1,000 or so away, but I'm just saying 3,000 to 5,000 is a pretty significant step up. Then when we go up to the actual G7, it's quite a jump in price, up to £240. But now we go to a 1080p screen. We're still on the Snapdragon 632, which I won't lie, I'm not sure how big a difference that is from the 632 to the 636 that's in the Plus that we've got here today. But it's still, I mean, that's the same CPU as is in the £150 Play. We're up to 4 gig of RAM though at this point. So, okay, that's pretty good. And then kind of the creme de la creme is the G7 Plus, £270. And it has got obviously the best of everything, but it's not that different to the G7. It's just the slightly newer Snapdragon 636. So I don't know, I can't tell you if that £30 is worthwhile. But we'll move on through the review and we'll let you decide what you think of the, well, I'll tell you what I think of the G7 Plus and you can make your own decisions, I suppose. So here is the actual device that we're talking about. Some points to note on the design. It's quite slippy. So it's quite a shiny kind of front and back, and it does come with a case. I'm just not a case kind of guy. The case seemed okay. It's quite, PVC, TPU, whatever the word is, quite rubbery, tactile, grippy case. And design-wise, it's not really anything groundbreaking. Up the one side, we've got the power button, which is slightly textured, the volume rocker. On the top here is the SIM tray. The SIM tray is quite interesting. You can fit 2 SIMs and a micro SD card. From what I can see, it is a huge, big, long SIM tray. Nothing down the other side. Speaker, USB Type-C for charging, which is good, and a headphone jack. Whoa. Doesn't bother me, but I know some people are very passionate about the headphone jack. Also part of the display, there we go, you can see it more there. It does have a teardrop notch. I don't mind teardrop notches really. I'm okay with a teardrop notch. You can't hide it in the software, which has kind of surprised me a little bit. Most people that have notches put some way of having that whole bar being black. You have the icon still in white then, and it does hide the notch. As I say, with teardrops, I'm okay. That's reasonably small. The bezels, this is, and we're going to come to the screen in a moment, this is an LCD screen, so it can't get edge to edge like you can with an AMOLED. But that's not bad effort, and I quite like they've got a little, just says Moto on the bottom there, if you can see that. That's quite nice. Let me just turn the brightness down a little bit because it affects what you can, there we go. So you can perhaps just see it says Motorola there along the bottom. Let's talk about the screen while we're at it. So it's 6.2 inch, as I mentioned, LTPS IPS LCD. This is 2270 by 1080, which is a 19:9 ratio, which is about 405 pixels per inch density. In my test, it scored 550 lumens, which is kind of in there with other similarly priced devices. I think it's right next to the G5 as well, which is interesting. What I thought was interesting was the G4 managed 720 lumens, the G6 501. So for some reason the G4 they put like actually quite a powerful screen on it, and it really shot up the tables. And then they went back again after that to the sort of, well, I mean, just not as good screens, I suppose, if it can't get as bright as that. Having said that, it's actually been quite bright and sunny in London the last few days, and I've not had any issues reading the screen. I've even used it when I've been out cycling when it's been reasonably bright, and it's attached to my handlebars, and I've been able to read it fine. So the screen, I mean, LCD screens these days, they're just a lot better than they used to be. There's not as big a difference. What it does mean is we don't have an always-on screen. So if I turn it off, you get nothing. Obviously, when you get a notification come in, it's going to light up. You can lift to wake, things like that. So it's not, you know, it's not a total loss. But yeah, no always on display. Let's come back to the actual hardware. So I've mentioned it's got the 636, which is actually a 14 nanometer chipset. 10 is kind of still sort of top end, but 7 is the sort of like cutting edge. So this is a bit of a step back at the 14, but not too big an issue. The CPU itself is an octa-core 1.8 GHz Cryo 260. It's got the Adreno 509 GPU. It's got 4 GB RAM, that's the thing I mentioned, and 64 GB of storage. Geekbench 4, it only scored around 4,934. It's my average, ran it a few times, which kind of surprised me when you see how smooth the device is. So anything I've been doing, I've not really noticed any lag. It generally seems nice and smooth. Just go into some different apps, I suppose, and you can see that. Move my cycle gear you saw there. So it to me it's generally nice and slick. If we're on the app switcher, we go here, we come back to the Play Store. We're going to come to those in a moment. But yeah, the performance, it just doesn't. 4,934 is not a particularly high score. But I just don't think you would guess that looking or operating the phone. I've mentioned already that it has a headphone jack. If we move on to the cameras. So on the back we've got a 16 megapixel f1.7 with optical image stabilization, which is quite good for a phone of this price. It also has a 5 megapixel f2.2 depth sensor, so that is just used for depth sensing, for help for sort of portrait modes and things like that, which I've got to be honest, I don't really try out with this device. I'm not a big one into portrait modes, and that's when it's on the rear camera, that's taking other people, and I generally don't go around saying, can I take your photo for a review? So I can't tell you too much about that. What I can say is the stills, they generally look pretty good. There's good detail. The exposure generally was okay. I took some quite tough, challenging shots, I thought, into the sun, and it generally seemed to cope quite well, I thought. Low light didn't look too bad, I guess helped by the optical image stabilization. And the front-facing camera, again, generally looked okay. I think it struggled on one photo where it was pointing up from my handlebars and it was very bright sky, and it kind of slightly overexposed it a little bit, but generally it looked very good. I didn't mention the front-facing camera is 12 megapixel. Now, both of them, front and back, have HDR, and they will do basically 4K video at 30 frames per second. I think that's quite good for a phone that's £270, especially the front-facing. Because I don't think there's a lot of phones that do front-facing at 4K, you know, 2160p. So that's quite impressive, actually. The video itself generally looked pretty good. I took it in a few different types of conditions, and all in all, I thought, yeah, that's quite reasonable. The optical image stabilization worked quite well. Where it did struggle, as you do find that it does, was in the low light conditions. So it didn't look great at night. It just didn't let in as much detail as, although it wasn't as blurry, not blurry, there wasn't as much noise as you might get with some. At the same time, you lost a lot of detail in the low light. If we move on to software, so let me get up the system. I think it's going to be an about phone. So we can see Android version 9 at this point. See the build number down there if that helps anybody. It's quite a stock Android experience, which possibly is what sort of helps with it being quite a slick device. There's not a huge amount more to say, I guess, apart from don't worry so much about the benchmark because it is so slick. It does have Moto Actions, which is actually what we were just looking at when I came in. Where was that? Where did it go? Moto Experience and Action. So we go into Moto Actions. So you can see things like that: lift to unlock, screenshot editor, 3-finger screenshot, 1-button nav, fast torch. So I like things like the fast torch. If we look at the back, I think that's really useful. That's the kind of thing they should build into stock Android, in my opinion, because people do use their flashlights there as torches quite often. You've also got, oh, what are we in here? Flip to do not disturb. All right, we don't need that. We've also got the quick launch of the camera by twisting. I think it will change to the front facing by twisting again, and back by twisting again. And one thing you might have noticed me doing actually, so I've opted for the little pill along the bottom. So I've got quick app switcher going to the right. I've got back going to the left. Can we switch back into one? If I tap, I go to the home. If I lift up, I've got my app switcher. And actually it's really quite sort of, you get used to it quite quickly. I do quite like it. It doesn't take up too much space along the bottom. I mean, obviously it's not that different to what you get on the Pixel devices. So if you've used them, then you should be quite ready for that. Onto the battery. So it's only 3,000 milliamp hour battery, which is kind of surprising. But actually, when I look back through the history, I was looking back through the battery tests, most of the Moto G series are that sort of size. It does have 27 watt fast charge. I won't lie, I didn't really test that. I think the charge is still in there, so I just plug into my thing. I mean, I just charge overnight. I probably should have. I do apologise. In my test, it only scored 90%. And I say only scored 90% because actually that's very similar to, I mean, I think the other three Moto G devices sandwich it. They're all within 1% of it basically, which was actually kind of funny. But it surprised me because it almost seemed like it's got a magical battery. It was just going on forever. The first time I charged it, I literally used it for 2 days. I didn't put it back on charge till that evening, and even then it was still on about 30%. And if let's go into AccuBattery rather than the actual. So I'm at 50%. It's telling me I'm going to get 24 more hours use. It says 4 more hours of screen on time, 40 more hours of screen off time. If we go to the bottom, it tells us the actual. See that there? So on a full charge, based on the last, however many times I've been using it over the last few days, 8 hours of screen on time, 81 hours of screen off time. So for me, about 49 hours of combined use on a 3,000 milliamp hour battery. That's really impressive. And unlike the Xiaomi's and other sort of manufacturers, I don't think it's killing apps in the background. I've not had any issues with it. Me not getting notifications, or I don't know how they've done it. And that's why I think the G7 power with 5,000 milliamp hour batteries, that could last like, I don't know, 4 days? That's craziness, isn't it? I'm actually tempted to get a hold of a power just to try and see if it really can last that long, if it does the same sort of wizardry that the Plus does. That's really impressive. The battery is really impressive. So, what do I think? It's a good solid device. It's one of the ones where I've not really got excited about it because it's not got massive, a particularly huge USPs on it. There's nothing like, wow, this is amazing, apart from maybe the battery. But at the same time, it's not really got weaknesses. It's £270 for a good solid device. The low benchmark could be a concern if you're a gamer or I guess like a really heavy user, but otherwise generally I wouldn't worry about it. It seems a very nice and smooth and slick device. Possibly helped by stock Android. I love stock Android. I don't know how that. Let me know in the comments actually. How much does that bother you? Maybe the people watching my videos are more sort of techie, and maybe the people I speak to more about phones are more techie, and they all want stock Android, but I don't know what the average user is that bothered. I don't know. The camera performance is it's reasonable to good for the price that we're paying for the phone. As I mentioned, the battery standby, crazy, ridiculous. I really don't know how they do it. And I don't think I particularly mentioned it actually, but the speakers, they're really loud. They scored 91.9 in my test. Where was I supposed to have mentioned that? They scored 91.9 in my test, which is the 4th highest of any phone I've ever had. And they're really good speakers. They're nice, loud and clear. Maybe a lot of people aren't bothered by that. To me, it's quite big. I listen to my podcast. Most phone calls I do, I put on speaker because I'm at home and, it's just easy to put it on the desk and talk to people. The speakers are really good. So, all in all, it's just a good, solid device. Now, what I can't tell you, because I'm not lucky enough that Motorola would send me like one of each, I can't tell you if this is the one to go for. It could be you get most of this for just the regular G7 at £240. Hell, the 5,000 mAh battery at 180 might be good enough for you. Don't be put off by 720p screens. Most people really can't tell the difference. But yeah, generally the G7 series, they look like a good solid set of phones. I would love to hear your thoughts. Please let me know in the comments down below. I do read them all. I'll reply if I think it's necessary. So please do comment down below. Let me know your thoughts. But for now, my name's Andy. I'll catch you all again soon. Well done, and thank you for making it to the end of the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, you might want to click the little fella that should hopefully appear about here to subscribe. You may also want to check out some of my other videos, which are going to appear somewhere there. Also, come and have a look at my website, androidandy.uk. There is also a forum. Come and say hello on the forum if you've got any questions about things or request me to review things or anything else. Just come and have a chat on the forum.